Hello, my name is Bill and this is Restoration. In today's episode, what I want to do is install this oak block into the back of the bumper. Now, these old Willys Jeep bumpers were notoriously weak, and they would install these oak blocks in the channel behind the bumper, and the idea was to give it some stiffness. And then during the war, they would wrap rope around it, and they'd use the rope for towing and other things. But as I said, these bumpers were notoriously weak. When my dad bought the Jeep in 1949, he bought it with the intentions of making it a true adventure vehicle. Now, to understand it, or to put it into context, you have to understand what New Hampshire was like in the late 40s. New Hampshire was at least our part of New Hampshire, the western part of New Hampshire, was an extremely rural area. There were some larger towns, but as a rule, everything was still really very rural. And farming and hunting were a mainstay of a lot of the people, a lot of the activities that went on at the time. But something had also began to happen at that time. There was a change. Society was changing. New Hampshire's culture was beginning to change, and the farms were slowly beginning to go away, and people were spending more time. At the end of the war, we were a great industrial power, and this area was known as the Precision Valley, and the machine tool industry was growing rapidly, and people were going off the farms, out of the rural areas, going into the factories, and they were joining the machine tool industry that had literally taken off during the Second World War. You know, the period of time that this old Jeep was manufactured. Well, the results of that were that a lot of the backcountry it was growing up. It was growing in. The old fields were growing in with regenerative growth, bushes, trees, and all that kind of stuff. And New Hampshire was crisscrossed with these old roads, these old dirt roads, these old farm roads. And what was happening is, over the years, these roads were beginning to grow in, and they were growing in with saplings and small trees that were literally making them unpassable. Well, my dad wouldn't have any of that, so what he did is he pulled off the original Jeep bumper, the original Willys bumper, and he welded on this piece of iron, 1/4-inch iron. It's an L iron. I weighed this morning, and this thing weighs 36 pounds. And when I asked Dad, why did you do that? Why did you pull off that original bumper? Why did you weld on this piece of cast iron? And he had a simple answer. And the answer was, so I could push things. And I'm thinking, push things? And I said, Dad, what do you mean push things? And he told me this story of what it was like in the late 40s, early 50s here in New Hampshire. Now, I spent years and years and years roaming the woods with my old man. I mean, I understood the dynamics of the changing landscape, but he saw it in a way that even predates my experiences with it. And he said to me, he says, Bill, he says, I was used to being out in the woods. And he says, this Jeep, he says, gave me an opportunity to get back further than I've ever been. So he says, the trouble was, he says, is all these old farm roads, all these old woods roads were growing in with saplings and small trees. And he said, I wasn't going to be deterred. He says, I welded this bumper on, and he says, I was going to use that bumper to push over those saplings. My dad really remade a lot of the local woods roads. I mean, he was going to go places, and that bumper, this bumper right here, was the bumper that Dad welded on, and he pushed a lot of stuff, and he got in the woods. It was, as I said, a true adventure vehicle, and that's what Dad intended it for. Now, moving forward with the restoration. Now, I pulled this bumper off before the restoration. Before we did the restoration, I had to go in with grinding wheels to get it off, and the results were, from him pushing stuff, is all those frame horns were pretty well twisted up and bent. But I wanted to get this bumper off. I wanted to get it off for two reasons. One, I knew in the restoration it wasn't going to be appropriate to the restoration, but I also didn't want to lose it, because that story that I just told you, that bumper is that story. All right, so let's pull this stock bumper off and do what we need to do to get this oak insert put in.